We know that President Zelensky was there. We know that the president of Syria made an appearance as well. Who was absent? What does that say about Europe's focus at this point in time?
Yeah. Well, one of the sort of notable absences was Viktor Orban, right? He has been voted out as prime minister of Hungary. That was a couple of weeks ago. And of course, that has sort of shaped very fundamentally the power dynamic at the table of the European Council, where all the leaders were assembled to discuss the various different issues that are facing Europe right now. And once again, the tone and the sort of conversation being set by Donald Trump and the activity in Iran, obviously the energy crisis. But again, the absence of Viktor Orban, and we had a sort of nod to this from the Polish prime minister, Donald Tusk, who said for the very first time in a very long time at the European Council table, Russia was not present, which was a sort of dig at Viktor Orban and his close ties to Vladimir Putin. But when you think about Zelensky, who was there on Thursday night meeting with leaders, he has had a really spectacular reversal of fate over the last couple of weeks. You know, a couple of weeks ago, it was unclear whether or not the Europeans were going to be able to get him that 90 billion euro loan. That is absolutely fundamental. That's really a survival lifeline for the Ukrainians to fund the war effort for the next 2 years. That has shifted. They also got through the 20th sanction package. They're now working on the 21st sanction package. These are European sanctions over on the Russians. And now there's a very active conversation at the European level, now that Viktor Orban is out, about the process of bringing the Ukraine into the European Union, the accession talks. That is something that the Ukrainians would like to see happen as soon as next year. That is intensely optimistic in terms of a timeline. But there were real conversations and real concerns about this being a real conversation or sort of being able to make any progress while Viktor Orban was there. And this is something that is now being discussed at this highest level for the Europeans. We should say it's still a pretty long path for the Ukrainians to join, but it's absolutely symbolically and, of course, economically vital for them in their future.
That's some pretty direct diplomatic shade. Russia not present. That's kind of as shady as you get in those circles. The other thing I've been hearing a lot of sound on, and I know you flagged some sound from the Romanian president about, is there was this Reuters report about an internal Pentagon memo talking about how the president might be looking into trying to suspend Spain and other members who aren't helping with Iran, even going so far as to talking about the Falkland Islands, possibly seeing if they could change sides and you know, say that the British don't get the Falkland Islands anymore. We do want to play you flag this sound from the Romanian president, and then I'll come back to you.
Inside the European Union, we are one of the biggest supporters of the transatlantic relation, because we understand that our security, the Europe's security, depends a lot on NATO and directly on the United States. Of course, so you know all the context. There was for years there was a disbalance between the expenses for the security between the United States and Europe.
So, Oliver, that's from your interview. Why did you want to talk to him, and why does Romania stand out as we talk about how Europe is responding to the conflicts in the Middle East right now?
Yeah, so I mean, Romania is one of the only EU nations that actually allowed the United States to use their bases for refueling and other sort of operational tasks in their bombing campaign and their war in Iran, which was something that really sort of is an outlier within Europe. You know, again, the Europeans keep being put in these sort of impossible positions by the president of the United States, where on the one hand, basically their survival from a security standpoint, Article 5 of NATO, is so dependent on having the United States remaining bought in on NATO, while at the same time really not wanting to become a party to the war in Iran. So Romania really sort of stuck as a sort of very interesting sort of example there. And I asked him, you know, we're talking now about Trump possibly reprisals on NATO. Are you thinking that maybe you can get some rewards now from the Trump administration for having helped them? And he said that, listen, that they've been building their economic relationship for a very long time. He did say that American companies in the conversations they've had recently will be now more involved in Romania and sort of extracting oil and gas. But going back to this idea of the reprisals for these NATO nations and European countries that did not help the United States. I mean, Donald Trump has really sort of oscillated quite wildly. On the one hand, saying that NATO should be involved on the strikes or in some way in the military operation. On the other, saying that they don't need the help. But this email that is apparently circulating, reported by Reuters, that the United States is thinking about finding ways to suspend or kick Spain out of NATO, ostensibly because, of course, Spain did not allow the base use, but also because they're the only nation within NATO who is not committed to paying that 5% of GDP to defense.
Ollie, last question is just about the vibes of this conference, and I'm curious how much unanimity there is. You mentioned Viktor Orban not there. I don't think that his successor was there either. But how much does that kind of change the tenor of an event like this one as Europe talks about doing more to defend itself, perhaps without the U.S.'s aid in the way that it has in the past? What was the feel at this conference?
Yeah, I think it changes the tenor pretty dramatically, David. I mean, we think about Viktor Orban has really been the thorn in the side, and a lot of people in other nations have hidden behind Viktor Orban because he was brash enough and bold enough to basically say no to stuff. But there's another point that's also made. It was made by the Belgian prime minister that basically the euphoria over Peter Magyar and the sort of new regime within Hungary may be a little bit overblown, that things may not be just sort of full unanimity going forward, that actually some of the opinions that Viktor Orban held were shared in some ways by some of the other European member states. And we should say that there was also an election in Bulgaria last week. You had a sort of more pro-Kremlin figure that was sort of elected there. And so you have these vacillations, particularly in Eastern Europe, between these sort of very pro-EU governments and these sort of less pro-EU governments. So I don't think that it's sort of a closed question in dealing with some of these questions. But I do think that Viktor Orban, symbolically, after 16 years being out, really makes a big difference in terms of getting some of these initiatives over the line, particularly when it comes to Ukraine. And you could feel it really from Zelensky while he was there over the last 24 hours.